When was the last time you met someone who had been sanctioned at that point?
I think the honest answer to that is I'm not sure that I can recollect when I might have met somebody who has been sanctioned.
Anybody?
You've never met anybody who's been sanctioned. Yes, the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, Mel Stride, actually said that. But anyway, my friends, I do hope you're all well this fine Friday morning. On Wednesday morning, in the Works and Pensions Committee meeting, where they were scrutinising the work of the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, OBS, SNP MP for Glasgow East David Linden put our Mel Stride of Central Devon on the back foot with some yes or no questions. Tories no like yes or no questions for the obvious reasons.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Secretary of State.
Morning.
Let's start with a very simple yes-no question. Do you believe in evidence-based policy?
Well, it would be rather odd if I said I didn't, wouldn't it?
Good. Excellent.
Yes. So I think you can safely know the answer to that first question. Yes.
Okay. So over the course of the last while, the committee has taken evidence from a number of people, think tanks, academics, on conditionality. Dr. Katie Jones said they didn't work. The IFS have said on sanctions, as a result, and I quote, "The policy produces fiscal savings indistinguishable from zero. Furthermore, we find negative effects on the mental health of individuals who remained out of work, though positive effects for those pushed into work." Indeed, even the Conservative think tank Bright Blue published a report last year pointing out the inadequacy of the current levels of social security payments and advocating, and again I quote, "a benchmark should be set under which benefits cannot fall below even if a sanction was applied to their recipient." They're all right. Sanctions don't work, do they?
No, I disagree with that.
Why?
Well, because there is evidence, and I'm happy to write to the committee on that matter, that is the case. I think also I would question, and I don't know the specific details of the people that you've raised and the work that they've conducted, but it is typically the case that one of the things that is not considered when looking at whether they're answering the question whether sanctions are effective or not is the deterrent effect that sanctions have over a wider audience of those who are not at any point themselves sanctioned. So that's the first point. I think the second point is that, and I think most people would feel this was reasonable, that if somebody is in a position where they're able to work, they're being offered support, they're being provided with support through the benefits system, and, for example, they are failing to turn up to appointments with a work coach. And we're not talking about appointments every day, we're talking about periodic appointments with a work coach, and that is the source of over 97% of the current sanctions in operation. Then it's not unreasonable for there to be some form of consequence for that. On the point of conditionality that you raised, David, at the beginning, I mean, conditionality has been a feature of the welfare and benefits system, the employment benefits regime, since the founding of the welfare state. This is nothing that's new. And once again, when we use this term conditionality, you can see it, and perhaps that's the way you're projecting it today, as something that is onerous and perhaps potentially unnecessary and unreasonable. But I don't see it that way. I see it as support, and I think the things that we've been already in this session discussing, for example, work well and bringing in the appropriate medical support alongside work and universal support, helping people into work and keeping them into work by liaising with them and having staff to do that. I think that those are all hallmarks of a caring society that wants the best for people. And so when I hear the word conditionality, that's what I hear, rather than something that's unnecessary and unreasonable. But on sanctions, just to get back to that, because I think this is a really important point, a sanction is only applied where something that is really basically unreasonable and was avoidable on the part of the customer has occurred.
Notice the word customer. Well, when you talk about customer, can you imagine somebody heading off to the job centre and the bus blobs? Does that mean they're going to be sanctioned?
Where a sanction may otherwise occur, but there is a perfectly reasonable reason why, for example, somebody didn't attend a particular work coach session, then that is taken into account, and work coaches have discretion not to apply or seek a sanction. The sanction themselves work through a process whereby the work coach refers the possibility of a sanction to a decision taker. So that's somebody who's independent of that interaction between the work coach and the claimant. There is the potential for an appeal against a sanction to an independent tribunal, and there is a hardship fund available for those who are sanctioned and as a consequence of the sanction find themselves in a very difficult financial situation. So I'm satisfied overall, and inevitably in a vast system with many of these kind of interactions happening. I'm not saying it's entirely perfect, and it never will be, but I think the fundamental principles and the processes that are employed here are pretty right, actually.
You mentioned earlier on that you'd been out to see some stuff in Birmingham, and you're a Secretary of State that generally gets out and manages to visit job centres and organisations. When was the last time you met someone who had been sanctioned at that point?
I think the honest answer to that is I'm not sure that I can recollect when I might have met somebody who has been sanctioned.
Anybody?
You've never met anybody who's been sanctioned. Wow.
Who's been sanctioned?
What I would say is I have been to job
centres. It's just a yes/no answer question. Have you met somebody?
Sorry.
It's just a yes/no question. Have you ever met somebody who's been
sanctioned? I don't actually know. But the level of sanctions is currently about 6%. It was prior to the pandemic about 3%.
Can I just confirm though, you've never had interaction with somebody who has actually been sanctioned?
I don't know, because when I've met those that are going through the system, I wouldn't typically say, oh, my name's Mel Stride, I'm the Secretary of State, have you been sanctioned? So I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Okay, do you know how much the average amount is that someone loses when they're sanctioned?
I think maybe we... Catherine,
so I'm asking you, sorry, Secretary of State, I'm asking you the question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Off the top...
In other words, somebody save me, I'm getting rinsed here.
Top of my head, I wouldn't know what the average is, and I don't...
Pounds.
And I don't know... Can I...
No, sorry, so it's £600. So if someone's starting from a standing start where they only receive state support, right? Yeah. They're not incredibly wealthy, perhaps like yourself, and you remove all of that state support from them. What then happens at that stage, Secretary of State?
Well, as I say, there is a hardship fund. There is a measured and proportionate approach that is taken within the system as to whether a sanction is applied in the first place. The sanction applies, as you know, to the standard allowance, not to the other elements of universal credit. And could I also make the point that when we talk about sanctions, they are there for the purpose of trying to have a system that ultimately ends up with more people going into work and work being the way out of the kind of difficulties and pressures that you're rightly describing.
Yeah, so you've pretty much conceded this morning that you've never spoken to somebody who's actually been sanctioned.
No, I didn't say that. I said that I didn't know.
You've not been able to cite any opportunities.
Hold on. Let's be accurate as to exactly what I just said. I said that I don't know whether the UC recipients that I have spoken to have necessarily been subject to a sanction or not. And in many of those conversations, frankly, I think it'd be rather indelicate to go into that kind of detail with those people. So that's quite distinct from saying that
I'm a constituency
I never have. Yeah.
A constituency MP, and I meet people just about every week who've been subject to conditionality, and what a lot of them tell me is that being sanctioned pushes them into destitution. They have to be fed by the local food bank. They have to rely on the charity of people in their community. They experience mental health crisis as a result of that. May I gently suggest to the Secretary of State that if you're looking to get people back into work, plunging them into further poverty and destitution is not a particularly good way of doing that. I want to move on to the cost.
Can I just clarify that, David? I know you're the one to ask the questions, but just for the point of clarity,
yes.
Are you saying that we should not have any a sanctions regime at all? Are you saying scrap the whole thing?
I'm suggesting there's a much better way of doing things, and it seems to me like perhaps your understanding of sanctions is very theoretical and not actually based on how it interacts with people on the ground. And the fact that you've not been able to tell me today what your conversation with somebody who's been sanctioned has been like strikes me as being somewhat concerning. But I want to move on.
Wow. See, the thing is, like, as I said, notice when he said the word customer, we're not customers. We are people who need help, who are, as David Linden said, not as rich as the likes of you. And what happens if this customer arrives late due to, as I said, the bus breaks down, or doesn't even arrive and they arrive late? Should they be sanctioned for that? When he talked about the hardship fund for those who have been sanctioned, does that also mean that they'll have to pay that money back? On top of when they get their universal credit? if that's the case, aren't they being punished twice? What if, by chance, someone who has been sanctioned used the hardship fund and let's just say, not long after, their cooker dies on them? Where are they going to find the money to buy another one? They'll probably need to borrow from family or friends. And if they can't borrow, what if they borrow it from a loan shark because nobody else can or even will lend them the money? That's further debt into it, and it's probably something they'll never be able to repay, and they'll get in a whole heaps of trouble, won't they? But for him to say, the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions say he's not sure if he's ever met someone sanctioned is clearly laughable, isn't it? Is he trying to say that nobody who lives in Devon Central are on universal credit or being sanctioned ever and having their lives turned into a nightmare by the DWP? Come off it, Mel. Were you trying to kid here? When SNP MP David Linden is in his surgery in Glasgow East, receives plenty of people in this situation, I'm pretty much sure there are people in Devon Central who are in the same boat. And if they were, why wouldn't they go speak to their MP? Who's the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions at the time? Let's be honest, if anyone can help them, it's going to be the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions, isn't it? Come off it, Mel. Stop trying to be... You're more intelligent than that. Now, I have to say, David Linden's next question just sums up everything you really need to know, don't you? He doesn't know off the top of his head. Now, maybe I'm being a bit harsh on him, but when he spouts on about this hardship fund again, as though everything will be fine when you get sanctioned, for me, these Tories seem to think that people on universal credit are just swinging their lead, living life over Ireland, going to Spain every 6 months on about 350 quid a week. Well, that's what it was for me and my wife when I was on universal credit. And somebody like that are just lazy layabouts. Now do I know? I will have a video ready for you on Monday, but that's for another day. So I shall leave this video here and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.